keep his commandments that he has given them, that they may always have his spirit.
The Cellar is directed by Jamie Langlands, who also co-wrote this. Langlands also directed R.I.P. Man, which I have recently reviewed. So this is a low-budget, kind of part slasher, part occult movie. So the movie focuses on this woman called Abigail, who is part of a kind of Alcoholics Anonymous style group that seems to be meeting in this church. And there's a kind of a group of other people there kind of seeking help and support, etc. And it appears the whole group is drugged, and kind of we follow Abigail as she sort of wakes up being locked away in this large kind of cellar. And she manages to escape, and finding strange things in this cellar. You know, masked man, potential kind of demonic entities. Something's been going on with these other kind of people who have gone to this Alcoholics Anonymous group. Some are dead, some seem to be sort of possessed or something. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. Now, again, this is a very low budget movie, so expectations in check in regards to what we can expect in regards to, you know, scale and production design, things like this. But on the upswing, what can we say that works in this movie's favour? There is definitely some artistic decisions here that I do think work quite well. I mean, at the forefront of this movie, I think, is the atmosphere. Langlands has created quite a kind of macabre feeling to this movie. It genuinely feels quite unsettling because you're not quite sure what you're watching. You're not quite sure what's kind of going on or what has happened to kind of Abigail. You know that something has happened, but you're not entirely sure what it is. The movie has a very slow and quiet pace to it, which gives it this kind of feeling of unease. And when we do see more overt kind of things happening, it's sometimes without explanation, or it's done in a way where it's not the forces that we see that are antagonistic aren't necessarily aggressive necessarily, but they are definitely sort of eerie or, you know, unsettling in some respects. This is what I would say. So this is a movie that isn't going for shocks, jump scares, things like that. It is a movie that has this definite feel of the macabre, the eerie, and the unsettling, as I've said. So I do think this movie achieves that. I also think there is some fairly nice direction in some shots. I mean, just again, considering the low budget that this movie has, I mean, there are some elements of the technical side that I do think this movie suffers from, but there are nonetheless some nice shots, use of kind of camera placement to kind of these kind of like unnatural kind of looking shots in regards to the angle that it's kind of being shot at. I mean, one of the ones on the poster they've used, I think is quite good. Good use of light. We kind of see this kind of priest, and he's got this kind of circular sort of window behind him, and the way he's kind of placed, it looks like a kind of halo and things like that. So I do think there's some attention to detail in some of them, the way this movie is constructed, the technical elements of this movie. Some of the kind of the lighting choices here, this kind of like this kind of red kind of like light that kind of flushes the area, that makes it kind of seem otherworldly to a degree. I think there's some technical elements here that look pretty good. Let's talk about our protagonist, Abigail. Now, interestingly, there's not a lot of dialogue here. Because for long periods of time, Abigail is on her own. She's trying to find a way out of this cellar, which I will point out is calling it a cellar is somewhat of a disservice. It's more like some type of underground bunker. It looks like massive. When you say a cellar, it looks like a cellar of someone's house. That's what it would sound like. This is seemingly like a labyrinth underground. So using a cellar as a descriptor is not really accurate, I would say. But anyway, she's kind of on her own in this area, and it feels, because of the way this movie is made, and she doesn't really have anyone to talk to, so it's just kind of like her sneaking, deliberately kind of being quiet to kind of not attract attention, gives it this kind of like this weird sort of quiet ambience where you know, you feel this kind of like growing sense of kind of dread and sort of animosity in the air, really. And I think that really works in some respects. And there is a downside to this, which we'll talk about in a minute, but in some respects it's quite a bold choice, and again, it makes it for a somewhat of a unique experience where for a good, I would say, 80% of this movie, we are following this one character as she does not speak, and is quietly kind of like moving around this property, trying to avoid people and just kind of like, you know, using her smarts. And on the subject of that, we have a female protagonist that is not like a kind of kick-ass girl boss. She's not like, you know, punching bad guys and overcoming guards and things like this, because that never really happens. But what she does do is use her smarts. She tries to overcome obstacles in her path by using intelligence, being able to kind of use objects to pick a lock, or, you know, trying to kind of like tie things up so they, you know, they can't hurt her and things like that. That's all I'm going to say. But she's using intelligence and smarts, really, and again the whole of just being sort of quiet so she can move around relatively undetected. Again, you know, it makes for a capable kind of lead character without being like a kind of a girl boss sort of style character. The effects are relatively minimal, but they are achieved kind of in-camera effects using kind of like practical makeup, contact lenses, things like that. And as such, the movie doesn't suffer from like, you know, crappy looking effects. When we do see the more overt supernatural elements, you know, the effects are done on a practical level and therefore look pretty good. They look in camera. They look, you know, creepy, and these things are there happening on screen. So that I quite appreciated. There is one element that I think does look a little cheap, and that is the fact that our kind of initial kind of antagonist is this masked guy, and they've literally used a mask that you can buy on Temu. Maybe occultists buy their crap on Temu. Maybe this is the thing that happens. But it's literally a mask from Temu without any kind of alterations from it. So I kind of amused myself whilst thinking about that. And it's like this sci-fi mask that doesn't really have any practical application. But whatever, anyway. So let's transition to what doesn't work. So, you know, outside of that little kind of funny little critique, what else can I say? I think the technical elements are relatively strong, but there are a couple of times where I do think there were some rough edits. Some of the editing here isn't quite strong enough, and there are also some audio mixing where I feel wasn't particularly strong either. So, you know, it's a low budget movie. It is what it is. It's not a high production value, but, you know, as to when you're watching this, you may notice a couple of kind of technical elements that are a little on the kind of on the rough side. But what about the kind of the story elements and things like this? So there's some deliberate choices here that I think are a little bit of a double-edged sword. So the whole concept here of a, you know, this one singular character, Abigail, sneaking around this facility without really saying anything, I do think builds the atmosphere, but maybe you feel like there's not a lot happening in this movie. Arguably, maybe having the bulk of the running time kind of be this, maybe makes the film seem somewhat kind of stretched out. The concept seems elongated more than it naturally should be. Because it does feel a little bit long at times. Even though the movie isn't long, but the concept seems stretched out. And the fact that we have a character who doesn't really speak makes for it somewhat of a kind of a movie where you feel like you don't have to really pay attention. You'd switch off in a way. It's not great. It's not holding your attention. Now, I understand the choice to do this, because this is clearly a choice to do this. But I've got to say, I think, you know, the downside of this is that you're not especially engaged. Yes, it's pretty atmospheric, it's spooky, but having more dialogue sequences, I think, would keep you as a viewer more engaged, more switched on. Even talking to herself, like, oh my god, how am I going to get out of here, you know, oh damn, you know, that sort of thing. It doesn't really happen. You never really feel she's particularly kind of panicked. She's quite composed, and that's in a way is a good thing, I suppose, in some respects, but at least initially. But as a viewer, I feel it makes us kind of like, so there's not really a lot going on screen, you know, and as such, you could arguably say maybe this is a little dull at times. The movie has this decision to have Abigail be our point of view character, and then she kind of finds other people that are in this Alcoholics Anonymous group in this kind of underground facility, in this cellar, or at some point this kind of gothic living quarters. And a lot of them are dead, not all of them. But when we come across these, for example, a body, we'll have like a quick kind of like segment where a character is kind of talking, and then we see that person giving their story as a kind of an Alcoholics Anonymous member. So, you know, we get a little bit of kind of dialogue there, but it's basically just kind of exposition. Someone kind of going, oh, you know, this is why I started drinking, etc. But the problem is that, again, this is a choice, but all we've seen to this is basically a corpse. And then we kind of get a little clip of this person who we've never seen before and we never see again, talking about their experiences with alcoholism. And it's like, okay, why? You know, that serves really no purpose outside of telling us it's someone from an Alcoholics Anonymous group. But we've never seen this character before, so why do, you know, we're not invested in who they are. They're dead clearly, so it's not going to go anywhere. And then it does it like 3 or 4 times, and it's kind of like, what was the point of those sequences? Outside of, yes, I know, I get it that we're we're in an Alcoholics Anonymous group. I mean, why not have these characters introduced at the beginning so we kind of get to know them, and at that point then we can kind of find out later on that they're dead or something. But at least then we've had an introduction to them, and we're wondering where they are. But no, that's not the decision here. I've also got to say, I think not all, but some of the acting from these people is not strong. Our main character admittedly doesn't have a lot of dialogue, Abigail, but I didn't think her acting was bad. You know, a lot of it's physical acting, but some of these kind of like sequences where we have characters that do have dialogue, or these ones that are, you know, talking about their journey through alcoholism and stuff, or addiction. Not strong acting, at least from some of them. So there's that. I have to say as well, this is a film which I think wants to have this kind of like, you need to think about it and sort of decide what you think had happened. So a kind of a somewhat of an ambiguous ending. You know, is there actually kind of supernatural stuff happening here? Is the fact that it's an Alcoholics Anonymous group saying to us that this is kind of some sort of effect of their addiction? Is it that they've been drugged by the perpetrators and this is some type of hallucination? Without actually telling you what happens, I personally would say it really did happen, because you still see a scene where Abigail is standing in front of a mirror looking away, and then we see her reflection like do something else that she's not doing, but she as a character doesn't see that, which would say to me that obviously she's not aware that that has happened, which means that clearly isn't a hallucination. It is because she hasn't seen it and we as the audience have, which would lead me to believe what we see on screen did happen. That's my take on it, but I just don't know. I think the general vibe here is like it's meant to be a kind of somewhat ambiguous kind of like you know, ending and stuff like that. And when we kind of get into the second half of the movie, which is where she's walking around these more living quarters rather than the cellar, even though I think some of the imagery was a little more disturbing then, it kind of feels like it's a little bit more style over substance. Like we have these kind of like snake-eyed people that are, you know, maybe they're kind of some type of demonic entity or something like that, but they don't really do anything outside of looking creepy. And again, it is creepy because they aren't doing anything. They're not like attacking. They're just kind of standing there looking weird. And again, it points for the creepy side, but like, what are you actually doing? So very, very much a movie where I feel this has a kind of a double-edged sword to it, if that makes sense. I think the things that work are also sometimes a detriment to it. Overall, an interesting movie, and I think visually speaking it has some quite strong elements to it, but narratively speaking I would say that's where it's at its weaker elements come in, at least in my opinion. And as a film is a narrative experience, to me I have to say this is probably a slightly below average movie overall, because I do not feel it really takes us on a journey through the decisions that I've talked about. So for me, it's a 4 out of 10, and it's a slightly below average movie, but I don't think it's it is out with its redeeming features, and I do think there's some interesting stuff kind of going on there. So if you like a moody movie, I would suggest checking it out. 4 out of 10, what were your thoughts? Leave a big comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.